The Sinai Peninsula is a sparsely populated region which is inhabited by nomadic Arab tribes. The Sinai Peninsula is located in between the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. This region became a battlefield during the wars between Egypt and Israel. Ever since the existence of the genocidal state of Israel, the Israeli government has attempted to expand its territory into the Sinai Peninsula, which belongs to Egypt. In 1967, with the help of the United States and Britain, Israel defeated a coalition of Arab nations and occupied the Sinai Peninsula. The Israelis wanted to take control of the Sinai Peninsula in order to exploit its natural resources and gain control of the strategic Suez Canal. However, one brave Arab Bedouin would not allow this to happen. Sheikh Salem Al Harash stood in the way of Israel's plan to conquer the Sinai Peninsula. Sheikh Salem Al Harash was an influential tribal leader in the Sinai Peninsula. He was the most important sheikh in the entire Sinai Peninsula and had the support of all of the tribes of the region. Sheikh Salem fought alongside the Egyptian army in 2 wars against the Israeli army. He participated in the wars of 1956 and 1967. He recruited many Bedouin tribes of the Sinai region and led attacks against the Israeli army in the Sinai desert. Sheikh Salem cooperated with the Egyptian army and used camels to carry weapons and equipment across the Sinai desert. Sheikh Salem allowed Egyptian soldiers to enter the Sinai Peninsula and carry out guerrilla attacks against Israeli checkpoints without being detected. Sheikh Salem taught the Egyptian soldiers the local Bedouin dialect and instructed them to disguise themselves in Bedouin clothes. Sheikh Salem Al Harash and his tribal army would assist Egyptian soldiers in ambushing Israeli garrisons, destroying armored vehicles, seizing ammunition and fuel, and killing and capturing Israeli soldiers. After the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, Egypt lost control of the Sinai Peninsula. Therefore, the Israeli army attempted to occupy the Sinai Peninsula. After the Israeli victory of 1967, the Egyptian army withdrew from the peninsula. However, Sheikh Salem continued to resist the Israeli army. The Israeli regime tried to persuade the Sinai Bedouins that life would be better under Israeli occupation than under Egyptian rule. The Israeli forces entered Bedouin territory and began to give the Bedouins Israeli identity cards. The Israeli government also adopted a policy of resettling Sinai Bedouins into towns and cities in Israel. The Israeli government took advantage of the extreme poverty in the Sinai Peninsula and offered tribes financial incentives if they agreed to abandon their nomadic lifestyle and resettle in Israel. The Israeli army wanted to ensure that the Bedouins were no longer a threat to Israeli operations in the Sinai Peninsula. However, Sheikh Salem Al Harash warned the tribes not to be deceived by these Zionist plans to conquer the region. In 1968, the Israeli Prime Minister organized a conference between the Israeli government and the Bedouin tribes of Sinai. The delegation of the Sinai Bedouins was led by Sheikh Salem Al Harash. In this meeting, the Israelis proposed that the Sinai Peninsula should be made into a so-called neutral international de-escalation zone belonging to the United Nations. Sheikh Salem rejected this proposition and stated that Sinai belonged to Egypt. This infuriated the Israeli delegation. Therefore, Sheikh Salem became an enemy of Israel. Sheikh Salem Al Harash retreated into the desert and continued carrying out attacks against the Israeli army checkpoints. The Israeli army chased after Sheikh Salem, however, they could not locate him due to his knowledge of the Sinai desert trails and mountains. Eventually, with the help of the Bedouin tribes, Sheikh Salem escaped to Jordan. The Egyptian President Jamal Abdel Nasser sent a private plane to take him to Cairo, where he received a hero's welcome. President Abdel Nasser honored him in 1968 and gifted him with a Medal of Excellence. The president also offered Sheikh Salem a huge financial reward. However, Sheikh Salem refused to accept it. After the end of the October War of 1973, Sheikh Salem Al Harash returned to the Sinai and died in 1981.